Well, it's been 146 years since Ireland and Scotland played their first international test match against each other, and tonight they met at the Stade de France in Paris in the final Pool B game for each team in this year's Rugby World Cup. In this video, I'm going to review that game and give you my thoughts about it all. Hello and welcome to Inside Rugby with Mark. I'm a Kiwi rugby fan living here in beautiful Mexico, and in this video I'm going to be talking about that game that just finished a few minutes ago between Ireland and Scotland, and this was the last game in Pool B for both of these two teams, and Ireland were looking up at setting up a quarter-final match next weekend against the All Blacks if they had a good win in this game. Now, coming into the game, Peter O'Mahony was celebrating his 100th cap for Ireland, which was a great achievement indeed. And on the other side, Blair Kinghorn was going to have his 50th cap for Scotland. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out too well for Kinghorn. He had to leave the field with an HIA problem in the first half, and he didn't come back onto the field. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go through each 20-minute segment of the game, talk about what happened, who scored, and what each team brought to that 20 minutes of play. Now, Ireland got off to the perfect start in this game. In the first minute or so, they scored a try after a great line break by their backline, and Gary Ringrose went over for a fantastic try in the left-hand side in the corner, and Johnny Sexton, unfortunately for Ireland, missed the conversion, but Ireland were off to a fantastic start. And even though it was the first minute or so in the game, what I noticed immediately was the intensity that Ireland were bringing to this game. Whether they had the ball or whether Scotland had the ball, it seemed to me that Ireland had much greater intensity in everything that they were doing on the field. So they got off to a perfect start by scoring that early try. And from a scoreboard point of view, that's what happened for the rest of that 20 minutes. Ireland stayed ahead by 5 points to nil. But what happened was Scotland got a lot of phases of ball, and it showed me another thing that was happening in this game that was going to be very, very pivotal in the outcome of this game, and that was the Irish defence. So every time Scotland put together a lot of phases of play, which they did do on a couple of occasions in that first 20 minutes, they had up to 15, 16 phases of play, and every time Ireland were able to shut Scotland down. Now, they either got a turnover from a breakdown, or Ireland were able to force an error from Scotland where they choked up the ball to Ireland and they were able to turn it over. So in the first 20 minutes, whilst the scoreboard stayed at 5 points to nil, what I was really impressed with Ireland was their defensive line, and no matter what Scotland were trying to do, they weren't able to penetrate that Irish defence. Now, also in that first 20 minutes, we saw some lineouts, some scrums, and some general breakdown play. And in all those areas, Ireland seemed to have the battle won against Scotland. They actually took a couple of Scottish lineouts in that first 20 minutes as well. So the likes of Doris and Van der Fleer were doing very, very good in the breakdown, and Henderson was doing a fantastic job in the line-out for Ireland. So Ireland really started off this game on the right foot. They really put Scotland under a lot of pressure, and you could tell with the way that Finn Russell was keeping the ball in hand. He was creating phase after phase of play, hoping that the Scottish backs were going to be able to crush through the Irish line, but it just wasn't happening. And the likes of Lote and Hugh Jones, who typically have good opportunities of breaking through defensive lines, they weren't able to crack through this Irish backline. Now, the other thing I noticed in that first 20 minutes was the work rate of the Irish team as well. They had 38 tackles in the first 13 minutes, which was extraordinary, because Scotland, as I said, had wave after wave of attack. But it didn't really matter, because in the end it was all about Ireland keeping them out, and the fact that Scotland weren't able to get through and score any points in that first 20 minutes I think was really significant psychologically on Scotland, because they were starting to think, and you could see it on the field, they were starting to think, how do we break down this Irish defence? And then a couple of basic things going wrong for Scotland also during that time of play, and a couple of things like not finding touch. Hugo Keening returning the ball very, very well for Ireland. And just at the end of that first 20-minute mark as well, Scotland lost their captain, Richie, to an injury. It looked like he did an arm or a shoulder or a dislocation there, which wasn't too good. And a sad moment for Richie. having come back from that concussion a couple of weeks ago, getting the right to play in this game, captaining his country in this last pool match, and unfortunately he spent the majority of it sitting on the bench watching his team. So not a good way for Richie to end his tournament. But it was all about the Irish defence for me in that first 20 minutes, in addition to them scoring that fantastic try. So they were able to keep Scotland out, and I think that started to put Scotland under a lot of pressure in this game. Then we moved into that 20-minute period before half-time, and this is where the game really broke open for Ireland and where they put the pedal to the metal against Scotland. And the great play here from Ireland was every time they got the ball, they'd go up in the forwards, they'd have that deep attacking play. Sexton would cut out a player, bring someone deep in running on the ball. It was either Archie or Ringrose, and then they would create opportunities out wide. And the next try came from exactly that kind of move, and it was a brilliant move, and it started about 60 metres out from the Scottish line, and Keenan ended up getting in for a fantastic try for Ireland. It was around that time that Kinghorn went off for an HIA for Scotland. He never came back onto the field, so also a bad day for him at the office in terms of not the way he wanted to celebrate his 50th cap for Scotland. So Blair Kinghorn unfortunately had to leave the field at that stage. But it was around about that stage, and Ollie Smith came on for Scotland, and he played fullback for Scotland after Kinghorn went off. And as I said, Ireland were really now starting to put their intensity into the game. And every time Ireland got the ball, they looked like they could break through the Scottish defence. So that try was scored by Keenan in the 26th minute, and Sexton converted that. So all of a sudden, Ireland were out to 12 points to 0. Now, it's probably important at this stage of the game that Scotland came back and actually scored some points and put the pressure back on to Ireland. And they got a lot of phases together after the restart from that Irish try. And in fact, they put 9 or 10 phases together, but then they lost the ball again. And Ireland came away with the ball. So that was an opportunity lost for Scotland, I felt, around that 28-minute mark, where they had an opportunity to come down into the Irish 22, looking very good, doing a lot of picking and rolling, going wide, looking for an opportunity to get through that defence. But then they turned the ball over and Ireland were able to clear the ball. And as we've seen in this World Cup with these top teams in World Rugby, if you don't put the score on the board, it'll come back to bite you. And that's exactly what happened next for Ireland. Got back onto attack almost immediately after that great phase of play from Scotland. They went rummaging back down into the Scottish 22, and Henderson came up with a try for Ireland. So they extended their lead even further after the 28th minute mark, and they went out to 17 points to 0. And that try by Henderson came after 11 phases of play by Ireland, and again they were very good at recycling the ball, keeping the ball in hand, moving Scotland down the field, and ultimately that defensive pressure led to points for Ireland. The conversion was successful from Sexton, and all of a sudden Ireland were out to 19 points to 0, and this game was quickly getting away from Scotland. And then in that 20-minute period before half-time, just 2 minutes to go before half-time, Ireland went in again through Keenan, so they scored 3 tries in that 20-minute period between the 20-minute mark and half-time, and that was absolutely paramount for Ireland's success in this game. 3 tries, no response at all from Scotland in terms of points, and Ireland went into half-time with a healthy lead. So half-time, it was 26 points to 0 to Ireland, and Scotland hadn't got over the Irish line or kicked any points at all. And Ireland already had that 4-try bonus point in the bag as well, which was something else they were looking for. So it was a very classy display by Ireland, I thought, in that first half. And there was a couple of things that I put it down to. First of all, their defence was huge, but also their intensity. And I think they came out onto the field today really wanting to take it to Scotland early. And of course, they got that early try in the first minute or so. And I think any team that scores that early, it gets them on the front foot. And they consolidated that in that 20-minute period between the 20-minute mark and half-time. And that's what good teams do. Once they get a lead, they don't let you back into it. So Scotland were not able to score any points in that first half, and that would have been really disappointing to Gregor Townsend and his team at half-time. They probably would have spoken about going out there and trying to win the second half, and that would have been their benchmark to try and get back into this game. The first half was well and truly gone, and there was no need to sit down and focus too much on that. They had to come out with a new intensity for the second half and see whether they could take it to Ireland. I think another thing they probably were thinking about as well is when the benches were used, that might change the context of this game a little bit. From the Irish side, there was too many good players to name them all, but Hugo Keenan was having a great game at fullback. Gibson Park was fantastic, both not only in attack and distributing the ball, but he was very, very good at getting in there and disrupting the Scottish attacks as well. So he won a couple of penalties for Ireland when he was clearing out the ball, getting his body position low over the ball, controlling his own body weight and doing a very, very good job. So for a halfback to be able to do that sort of stuff, that's the sort of stuff that Antoine Dupont does, but Gibson Park played that role very, very well for Ireland today throughout the game. I said in my preview video for this match that I thought the back three for Ireland were going to be instrumental in the way they played this game, and Peter O'Mahony was having a fantastic game in his 100th cap for Ireland today. Van der Fleer and also Doris were big as well, and they were really, really busy in that first half, and they were instrumental in the breakdown. If you look at the speed in which they go to the breakdown, they clear the ball out, and it sets up nicely Ireland having that opportunity to get the ball out to Sexton, and he decides then if they're going to run close off the forwards or whether they're going to distribute it out to Key and Ringrose to get it out to the wings. So it was a pretty intense game in that first half. I saw a number of players on both teams going down and taking injury breaks, and there was cuts and bruises. It was a tough, intense encounter, irrespective of the score, I thought. And kudos to both teams. They really did both put it on the line, despite the big gap in the scoreline at half-time. So 26-0 at half-time. I think Andy Farrell would have been very happy with that from his team. He would have said, right, get out there and continue doing it in the second half. He had an opportunity, I think, to look at Sexton and bring him off relatively early to save him for next week, because the game was out of reach for Scotland, I think, at half-time. So that gave him a little bit of leeway as far as looking at his replacements. On the other hand, Scotland were forced to bring on those players in the first half because of Kinghorn and because of Richie's injury, and that wasn't something that was going in Gregor Townsend's favour either, the way that he was having to use his bench today. The Darcy Graham and Duhan van der Werve were very quiet in that first half. Ireland kept the ball away from them, and when they did get the ball, which in van der Werve's case was only once in the first half, he was shut down very, very quickly, and we didn't see any big runs from him at all in the first half. And Darcy Graham was getting kept very busy on defence, so he was having to do a lot of tackles and a lot of work out wide, trying to stop these Irish backs who were just running rampage over top of the Scotland back. So he was put on the back foot and didn't get too many opportunities in that first half to show us what Darcy Graham's been doing in the rest of this World Cup so far for Scotland. So let's have a look at the first 20 minutes of the second half, and just when you thought things couldn't get any worse for Scotland, we had a bit of a handbag moment where the teams were pushing and shoving each other around, and once we settled down and the TMO came in and played what they did as their role of the 31st player on the pitch, we found out that Ollie Smith did a silly little leg trip on Johnny Sexton. He got all upset about it and came off mouthing and pushing his way around, and then everybody blew up and it all came into a WWE kind of few moments there. And unfortunately for Scotland, the TMO and the referee decided that Ollie Smith should go and sit down for 10 minutes. When you look at that incident, not too sure whether that was indeed the right thing to do, because there was a lot more worse things going on in the scuffle that happened afterwards. Anyway, that was the decision. He was off and cooling down, and the play got a little bit sidetracked there for a minute because Peter O'Mahony got his ego out of place as well and started mouthing off to a few Scottish players. They started pushing around, and it was all just wasting time where we could have been playing rugby. So in that first 20 minutes of the second half, Ireland extended their lead by 2 more tries, and the first one was in the 43rd minute to Dan Sheehan, and it was a fantastic try that was actually set up by Gibson Park with a huge loop out pass. And I really love this try because if you watch it back, you'll see that Gibson Park was involved on one side of the pitch and then he ran around and got the ball and then passed it out to Dan Sheehan to go in for the try on the other side of the pitch. So Gibson Park, fantastic effort. His work rate was very, very high in this game, and Ireland deserved that try. So they extended their lead after half time and went out to 31 points to 0. And at 45 minutes into the game, Andy Farrell decided that Johnny Sexton should have an early shower, so he brought him off and wrapped him up in cotton wool for the big clash that's going to happen against the All Blacks next week. So a great game by Sexton again. He led the troops around the park very, very well. His distribution, his game management is spot on, and his kicking for goal, I think he missed a couple today, but he actually kicked very well in general play. So I thought he had another really good game, Johnny Sexton, and we all know how important and pivotal he is for this Irish team. So there was not going to be any Antoine Dupont moment for Johnny Sexton in this game. He went off and got himself all set up to watch the remainder of this game from the sideline. So that meant that Jack Crowley came on, and I was really interested to see how he goes. I got a lot of raps for this young guy. I think he's a really, really good player, and it was good that he was getting some game time in a match at the Rugby World Cup like this that had a lot of intensity surrounding it. And then Scotland's luck in this game got a little bit worse around the 50th minute mark when Darcy Graham limped off the field, and Scotland were going to lose one of their attacking weapons that we thought might have a chance. If anybody was going to break through this Irish defence, it was probably Darcy Graham was going to be one of them, but he looked fairly badly injured at the hip area, so he hobbled off, and it really left Scotland in a bit of trouble then, because Horn, their reserve back, was the only man coming onto the field, and he's a halfback, of course. So Scotland had to try and make do with that replacement. And then that second try in that 20-minute period after the half-time was scored by Gary Ringrose, but it came from a fantastic kick pass from Jack Crowley, who just pinpoint accuracy got Ringrose going in the left-hand corner of the field. So Ireland were really dancing away with this game now. It was 36 points to 0. Scotland didn't look like they had it in them to come back in this game. And we still had 20 minutes to go. So it was going to be very interesting to see how Scotland finished in that last 20 minutes. So in that 20-minute period from half-time to the middle of the second half, Ireland scored another 10 points on Scotland. So they kept the scoreboard ticking over. And more importantly, they kept Scotland scoreless during that period of play. So the game was well out of reach of Scotland at this stage, and I was hoping that we were going to see Scotland throw the ball around a little bit more and just have a chance at getting through this Irish defence. And that's exactly what we saw. In fact, the last 20 minutes of this game, that was won by Scotland, no doubt about it. They scored 2 tries during that period, and they showed a lot of the tenacity that I think many of us were hoping to see for the whole match. But with the game well and truly out of sight, it was a little bit disappointing, I think, from the Irish point of view that Scotland got in to get those 2 tries. But they were 2 very, very good tries, and they were very, very well worked. The first of those 2 tries was in the 63rd minute, and Scotland went up on the right-hand side of the field into the Irish half, and the ball came out to Ashman, who had just come on as a replacement, and he scored the try about 5 metres in from the corner for Scotland. Finn Russell quickly took the conversion, and all of a sudden we had Scotland on the board, and Ireland were out 36 points to 7 at that stage. And just 2 minutes later, Scotland were in for another try, and the stadium started to get a bit noisy from the Scottish fans anyway. And it was a very good try. It was down the left-hand side of the field. Van der Verve got the ball, ran down inside, gave it to Tupolotto, and then he did it inside pass to Ellis Price that was there, and Price went over for a try for Scotland. So within 2 minutes, Scotland had scored 14 points, and although they weren't going to get back into this game, it was a little bit of a consolation for Scotland, and I think Andy Farrell would have been a little bit upset that the Irish defence let in those 2 tries. And as I said, they were 2 good work tries by Scotland, so don't take anything away from them at all. And then right on full time, Ireland had a chance to go in for another try, but it was disallowed. And the score ended, the full-time score was 36 points to 14, and what a display it was from Ireland. So my summary of this game was that I think every Irish player contributed to this game. I think the forwards were very, very good, particularly Porter up front as well. He had a big game before he was subbed off. But the likes of Doris and Van der Fleer and Henderson, They were all very, very good for Ireland. And again, in that first half, particularly that 20-minute to 40-minute period where they scored those 3 tries, that's where they took the game away from Scotland. And it came down to their discipline in defence, and it came down to their intensity on attack. And they just kept pummeling the Scottish defence until they found a way through. So it was a very impressive performance by Ireland in that first 40 minutes of the game. Even Stevens a little bit, with Ireland a little bit ahead in the first 20 minutes of the second half, and they did score 10 points to 0, but it was definitely Scotland's last 20 minutes of that game by scoring those 2 tries. So I think Scotland will be hugely disappointed. I think if you're a Scottish fan watching this video, you're probably very disappointed, although probably not too surprised. This Irish rugby team is a very good rugby team, and despite the gap in the score today, I think there was a gulf between these 2 teams in terms of class, in terms of intensity, and just the depth as well. And that's something else that we saw once Scotland had to make those unexpected substitution changes throughout the game. I think it did have an impact on the game from their perspective as well. And I think this Irish team now can look forward to their game against New Zealand with a lot of hope. I'm going to be making a preview video of that game with my Kiwi perspective on what I think is going to happen. So if you want to know my thoughts around what I think is going to happen between Ireland and the All Blacks next weekend, then watch out for that video this week. And the best way to do that is to hit the subscribe button on my channel here, give this video a thumbs up and stick around, because I'm going to give you exactly how I think the team's going to win that game and who's going to win it. So you have to stick around to see that one. So Scotland will go away from this World Cup, I think, a little bit disappointed. But in saying that, I think in reflection, with their 5th ranking in the world of rugby at the moment, I think that's pretty much where they stand. Coming into the tournament, they had a good opportunity. They're playing really, really good rugby. And at times throughout this Rugby World Cup, I think they didn't live up to their own expectation. I think the game against South Africa showed some of their weaknesses around their ability to focus on Finn Russell. And once he was shut down, then not a lot of things could happen. But we saw today Finn Russell getting a lot of ball. I wouldn't say that Ireland shut him down at all today, but when Finn Russell distributed the ball today, the Irish defence across the field was too good for Scotland. So it didn't matter that Finn Russell was getting the ball and able to run with ball in hand. He just wasn't able to get his back through that defensive line for Ireland. So they were huge on defence today. They were very good on discipline as well, not giving away too many penalties. And let's face it, it's very hard to crack this Irish team the way they're playing. So another outstanding display by Ireland in this game against Scotland. Well-deserved winners. And I think they did it right across the pitch. So if you look at lineouts, they were fantastic. Scrums, they were dominant. Their set pieces and their breakdowns, they were fast, and they won a lot of ball, and they won penalties as well. But their defence was the thing that really impressed me today. And there was no way that I thought that Scottish team, until that last 20 minutes where they did open up the Irish team, but by that time Ireland had made a few changes in their team and showed some ability. So maybe that's something we'll talk about in the preview for next week's game. What's going to happen in that last 20 minutes against the All Blacks? That's going to be very, very important when both teams have their benches on the field. So standout performances also in the Scottish team today. I think everybody tried very, very hard. Darge had a big game. He was playing very, very well. Gilchrist and Ritchie were doing their best as well while they were on the field. And again, I think it was unfortunate that Ritchie had to go off injured in this particular game. Ali Price had a pretty good game. Finn Russell was good again. Very busy in this game. Russell both in defence and attack, as he is in most games. Lote played well, trying to get the ball up, as did Hugh Jones, but this Irish defence was too good today against most other teams. I think we would have seen Scotland score more points, but they just weren't able to do it. And also, a last word on Kinghorn, and sad for him that he didn't get to play the full game today in his 50th Test match for Scotland. He'll be back stronger and better next time, I'm sure. But of course, it'll be sad days at the moment because this is the Rugby World Cup. So there we go. That's my thoughts on the Ireland versus Scotland game tonight from the Stade de France in Paris. A fantastic game by Ireland. They came with that intensity in the first 40 minutes. That's where they won it. And Scotland just weren't able to get back into it. Drop me your comments. Let me know if you're from Ireland. I'm sure you will. Tell me how fantastic your team is and what they're going to do to the All Blacks next week. I can't wait to read all those comments. And for Scotland fans out there, let me know what you think. Are you disappointed in this team's performance at the World Cup? Do you think they would have gone better than they did? And did you think they had a chance against both South Africa and against Ireland tonight before those two games were played? I'd like to hear from the Scottish fans. But don't go away, Scotland fans. We've got a lot of fantastic rugby coming up, and I'm sure if you're a real die-hard rugby fan, as I know a lot of Scottish people watching this channel are, you'll stick around for the rest of the World Cup. And there's going to be some amazing games coming up next weekend. I'm going to be back again tomorrow as we go into the last weekend of pool competition, or the last day I should say, of pool competition. And we've got that big one coming up between Fiji and Portugal, but we've also got that game between Japan and Argentina that's going to be a nutcracker as well. So make sure you stay tuned to my videos here on how I see those two games going tomorrow. That's it for this video. Hope you're enjoying the channel. If you do, give us a thumbs up. I'll see you again really soon in the next videos. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and keep enjoying this amazing Rugby World Cup from France. Bye for now.